How would you feel if you had a boss who was critical, demanding, doubted your ability, your skills, your expertise, had very high expectations for you, compared you to your peers, criticized you if you made mistakes, and gave you loads of negative feedback, but mostly ignored or glossed over the good work that you do? Would that be your definition of a toxic boss? Hello, and welcome to episode 90 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and confidence coach, Anna Manning. Today, we're going to be talking about the toxic boss you didn't know you had. So, that question that I just asked you at the top of the episode, I asked that question in every How to Grow Your Professional Confidence masterclass. And as part of that class, I always ask them that question. How would you feel if you had a boss who was critical, demanding, doubted you, had very high expectations, compared you negatively to your peers, criticized you if you made a mistake, and gave you lots of negative feedback, but mostly ignored or glossed over all the good work that you did? And surprise, surprise, there is a very predictable range of answers to this question. When I ask people this question, mostly people say, "Oh, I would probably feel terrible if I had a boss like that. So I would leave if I had a boss like that." Some people say, "I would take out a grievance." And a lot of people say, "I think my confidence would be on the floor. I would find it really difficult to work in that kind of environment." But then when I go on to ask most people about how they lead and manage themselves, this is exactly what they tell me. They tell me that the way they lead and manage themselves is critical, doubting, sets very high expectations, sometimes compares them negatively with their peers, criticizes them if they make a mistake, and gives them lots of negative feedback, but mostly ignores or glosses over the good work that they do. I'm going to rewind for a minute and tell you about how I came to even be asking my clients this question about their inner boss, about their inner manager. And remember that that boss, that inner manager that you have, even if you've never thought about this concept, if you're a repeat listener to the podcast, welcome back. You probably have thought about this concept before. But if you're a first time listener, or maybe you just listened to a few episodes, you may not have heard me talk about this concept of your inner boss. So, how you lead and manage yourself. So, if you come into my world, this is something that I'm going to be very curious about. I'm going to ask you about this internal boss. I'm going to ask you about how you manage and lead yourself, because I've found it's critical for me to know that if I'm going to help you. So I said I was going to rewind and tell you how I even came to ask my clients that question about their inner boss. Why did I even ask people about that? So I've been coaching professionals since 2018, which is almost 6 years. And what I noticed was there are specific problems that my clients would come to me with when it came to their professional confidence. So most of my clients would say, "Yeah, I'm pretty good at my job. Technically, I'm sound. I know what I'm doing. I'm getting promotions. I'm being considered for opportunities." That was all fine. But their confidence didn't seem to match up with where they thought it should based on, what other people assessed them as being, which was good at their job. And what I realized with these people that I was working with since 2018 was that they were managing and leading themselves and actually, I found without exception, in a pretty poor way. When I asked them those questions about whether they're critical, whether they're demanding, whether they doubt themselves, whether they have high expectations, whether they give themselves lots of negative feedback but ignore the positives, most people who I work with, i.e., most people who want to grow their professional confidence, will answer yes to some or all of those questions. So I started asking the people questions about their internal boss routinely. I ask every single client who comes on a consult call with me, because I'm trying to ascertain what is the problem. Do they have a toxic boss living in their brain which is causing them all kinds of problems? And often we find that the answer is yes. So now this is just a standard part of what I do with people. When they come to me for help, I'm like, right, what is your internal boss like? And I ask them a series of questions designed to ascertain what kind of environment their internal boss creates for them. Because I know that they're working within that environment day in, day out. It doesn't matter what job they go to. It doesn't matter if they change industries. It doesn't matter how many promotions they get. Their internal boss is coming with them. And think about it, that's the boss that oversees every piece of work, comes to every meeting, goes to every presentation, is with you every moment, even at 3 a.m. when you wake up in the night. So for me, it's a critical part of our work life is understanding and creating the kind of environment that we want to work in. And of course, for all of us, we work in an external environment. One which most of the time we can't control. We may be able to have an impact and an influence on it, but for most people, they have a boss, they have a team, they have a department, they have an organization that they work for. And short of leaving, they probably can't really change things that much. But what they can change is their own toxic boss. So now this is a standard part of what I ask people when they come to me for help because it is something that they are in control of. It's something that they can change. And what I've seen from working with people is that when they do, it can have a dramatic influence on their confidence. So, if you haven't already taken the quiz, which I've been running now since I think about October, I think we've almost 2,000 people go through that assessment now. And the questions that I ask in that quiz, it's called Are You Stuck in a Low Confidence Cycle? But essentially, the questions that I ask in that quiz are designed to ascertain how your inner boss operates. So I'm asking questions about whether you are self critical, about whether you have a lot of unmanaged self doubt, about whether you would call yourself a perfectionist. So, how high are your expectations and your standards for yourself? About whether or not you're comparing yourself to other people, about what would happen if you made a mistake. Would that have a severe negative impact on you and your confidence, and whether you're able to give yourself a lot of acknowledgement and positive feedback, or whether you tend to kind of gloss over that and go straight to the negatives. But that quiz is designed to ascertain exactly what your internal boss is like, because I know from experience that if we're going to change your professional confidence, we have to sort out that internal boss. So let's say you're like, yeah, I probably do most of that. So I'm fairly self critical. I've got quite a bit of unmanaged self doubt, whether that's imposter syndrome or whatever. I give myself a bit of a hard time if I'm having a difficult or emotional day rather than providing myself with a bit of support. I have very high standards. I'd give myself a very hard time if I'm in a mistake. I do tend to compare myself. This is a sometimes, not an all the time with comparison. But I do also tend to kind of focus on the negatives and maybe ignore the positives a bit more, right? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you had a boss that was doing all that to you every day, you would probably be telling your friend about them and saying, oh, this is how my boss is treating me. They criticize me all the time and they doubt whether I can do things, even though, they hired me and I got the job. And, if I make a mistake, I'm hung out to dry. They compare me to people. They never give me any good feedback. All they ever do is put red pen all over everything and focus on the negatives. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if you've got a boss like that, and I really hope that you haven't. But for some of you listening to this, you might have. So you will be intimately acquainted with the problems of having a boss like that. But if you had a boss like that, your friend would be saying, gosh, they sound toxic. I'd be getting out of there if I were you. And you can see why. We know now that working for a toxic boss has serious repercussions for people's well-being and for their longevity within an organization. We know that it stifles innovation, it stifles creativity, and it generally creates a fearful culture, which is difficult for people to work in. You may have worked in a culture like that. You may have worked in an environment like that. I'm guessing that it wasn't great. And whilst people still do work in environments like that, we do talk about it now. So in the past, in our working lives, I don't think people really cared. You had a job, you were supposed to be grateful of it. It might have been terrible, but you just got on with it, took your paycheck and went home. Now, things are a little bit different. Now, organizations are wise to the fact that the environment that people work in, the culture of the organization is important. And it's something that so many organizations strive to get right. And you might manage and lead people, and you may strive to get this right for them. You may think carefully about how you want to manage and lead people, and manage and lead people in accordance with how you would like to be managed. So, supportive, respectful, fair, tolerant, all of those things that you might want from your boss, maybe you're giving to your employees too. And that's adding to this culture, this environment that they work within, which supports their well being and actually supports their output. But what we do not seem to have got our heads around yet in the work world is the fact that if the boss who lives inside your head is toxic, we have a problem. We seem to have completely ignored or missed the fact that there is one very special boss who you can never get away from. And that's you. I do not hear conversations about this happening. I do not hear thought leaders talking about this. I do not hear this promoted within the industry. I do not hear it promoted within workplaces. Whenever I sit with HR people, organizational development people, and I tell them this is the way I think about things, this is the way I help people, they look at me surprised and say, I never thought of it like that. Which in one way is cool, right? Because maybe it's novel. But in another way, I think, gosh, have we been completely blind to miss the fact that we have an internal boss? And that internal boss has a massive impact on how we show up, on how we feel at work. So when I have a client with me and they say yes to all of those questions that I ask them, and we can see that actually their internal boss may be described as toxic, how I see that actually impacting somebody tends to be fairly standard. So, what I tend to see is that somebody's confidence is going to be lower than it probably should be based on the feedback that they get. So this is when someone's saying to me, in theory, I know I'm good at my job. Deep down, I know I'm good at my job. I know what I'm doing. I am capable. I am competent. However, I don't always feel like I am. The reason for that might be that you have a toxic internal boss. Because imagine working in that kind of environment. Critical, demanding, doubting, high standards. How could you feel confident within that kind of environment? I wouldn't. And when I ask my clients, they will say that they wouldn't either. So, low confidence is the first thing that I'm seeing when someone has a toxic internal boss. The second thing is a propensity towards feeling more panicky, experiencing more worry, and experiencing more doubt. So some of that will be the kind of racing mind, ruminating on things, over preparing for things, unable to focus, unable to just be clear and calm, really being in their heads instead of being in the room. So some of that is what goes on in our minds, but also some of it is, of course, what goes on within our bodies. So when we experience that kind of work anxiety, that worry, that those kind of physical stress response feelings, right? If we get hot, if we get shaky, all of those things are coming about from this physiological stress response. And in my clients who have a toxic internal boss, I think that this internal physiological stress response is activated a lot more than people who don't have a toxic boss. And again, it's easy to see why. Imagine you had an actual toxic boss. Of course, you would experience more panic, more anxiety, more worry. So, if you're getting the same treatment, albeit from inside your head, of course, you're going to experience those things too. Another thing I've seen, and this was me as well, is I think if you've got a toxic internal boss, you're less likely to take a risk. So I remember when I wanted to leave my job and go out on my own, I couldn't have done that like 5 years before because my internal boss was so awful that they would just constantly say, "Who do you think you are? You can't do that. You're just not one of those people." And imagine what that did to my confidence and my ability to take a risk. And this might be relevant to you in terms of trying something new at work or pursuing a new idea, maybe creating a new team or joining a new department, like whatever it is, whatever feels like a risk to you, it's going to be harder for you to take a risk when you've got a toxic internal boss because they're chewing you out before you even try. And you know full well that if you don't succeed or if the going gets tough, When you take that risk, you know that your internal boss is going to speak to you really harshly and be really critical of you. That's what mine used to be like. I know yours is going to be like that too, because I know all my clients are the same. So it's going to make you less likely to take a risk. I also think it's going to make you more fearful when you're learning new things, and it's going to lead to an increased likelihood of you having a fixed mindset, i.e., I can do this, I can't do that. I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. Rather than thinking, oh, well, as we call a growth mindset, I'm not that great at that right now, but if I put in some time and energy and effort, I'm sure I could improve. Learning new things and having a growth mindset about learning new things is incredibly difficult or maybe even impossible when you're working with a toxic boss. And the same if you're working with an internal toxic boss. I also think it makes people more resistant to change. So, change is one of those things that's always happening within our organizations, probably. Most people don't get away with being in an organization that just stays the same. Would you even want to? But I think when people have got a toxic internal boss, it makes them more resistant to change because you're automatically more fearful, less willing to take a risk. Your confidence is lower. You're more likely to experience those feelings of panic, anxiety, worry, all of that, which makes change harder for you to manage. I also see it taking a longer time for people to recover from failure. So this makes sense, right? If you have a toxic boss, they're going to be reminding you of a failure, telling you better not make that mistake again, like, it's just you always do stuff like that, whatever. Like, I don't know what they would be saying to you, but if you have a toxic internal boss, just like I used to, when I made a mistake, they told me that I was rubbish at my job. Why was I even here? I shouldn't have even become a solicitor. I wasn't even good enough to help these clients. That's what my internal toxic boss did when I made a mistake when I was a lawyer. And imagine how long it took me to recover from that mistake. Months. I reckon someone with a really supportive internal boss could have gotten over that in a couple of weeks. Took me months. So if you've got a toxic internal boss, it's going to take you a lot longer to recover from failure, mistakes, and setbacks. And you're probably going to know that. So again, it makes you less likely to take a chance, to take a risk, to innovate, to change, to, try something new. It also means that people tend to speak up less. So the toxic internal boss operates on a number of levels. So what they will do is decrease somebody's confidence before they go to do something. So tell them, "Oh God, you can't do this. You're boring. You're rubbish. No one's going to like what you have to say." Then it gives them a running commentary when they're actually within a meeting or within a setting where they're doing, public speaking, whatever. That's like, "Oh gosh, this isn't landing very well, is it? Oh dear, look at their faces." So someone ends up being in their head and not in the room. It might say to somebody, "Oh, you're going to sound like an idiot." Makes it way more difficult for people to just calmly and confidently say what it is they've got to say, whether that's deliver a presentation, whether it's just give their opinion about something, whether that's to actually challenge when they think something's wrong or they think something needs changing. All of that is less likely to happen when you've got a toxic internal boss. But that toxic internal boss gives you a hard time afterwards, which makes you less likely to try again next time. And also, it increases your panic and stress for the next time. So it's bad on 3 levels. Another thing that I see with people who've got a toxic internal boss is that they may have to seek more reassurance, whether that's getting people to check things, double checking things. Can you read over this? I'm not sure. I'm going to wait for ages until I press send. I'm going to read through this 10 million times, even though it's just a 3-line email. And it can lead to over checking, over preparing, and then overthinking even after you've submitted something. Because think about it, if you worked for a toxic boss, it's a dangerous place to be, right? So you're going to make damn sure that every single thing is perfect so that you don't end up in the firing line, which is a great idea. In that kind of environment, it's a dangerous environment. You don't want to end up in their way. You don't want to end up in their firing line. So you go over checking, over preparing everything, second guessing yourself, right? You're using all those behaviors to try and keep yourself safe in that toxic boss environment. But if you have an internal toxic boss, the same thing can be happening. And remember that internal toxic boss is the one setting the standards that it says you have to meet. And then the one telling you that you didn't meet the standard even when you did. They're the one that's pointing out every single flaw in that email at 3 a.m. the day after you've sent it, even though it really wasn't that much of a big deal. So I'm sorry if that list was a bit of a Debbie Downer, but that's just to give you a bit of an idea about what I see when someone has a toxic internal boss. The other thing, actually, before I end this bit, is that I see people more likely to kind of hide themselves and do a lot of masking when they're at work, which people tend to find quite exhausting. So they'll be putting on a mask, they'll be putting on a face, and it leaves them really depleted and really exhausted. And imagine, if you had an actual toxic boss, you'd probably do that too. You'd probably be like hiding who you were and how you were, any imperfections, in order to try and stay as safe as you could in that environment. But when people have a toxic internal boss, I see them doing the same thing, which means they can't use their strengths as much as they would be able to. They can't embrace their strengths and they end up seeing them as negatives, and they end up masking and putting on a face or acting the part, which leaves them feeling exhausted. Now, if you're thinking, look, I probably do have a bit of a toxic internal boss, please don't hear me saying that this is your fault, because I know where your head could go with this. Your head's really practiced at giving you a hard time. So I really don't want to give you just another thing to give yourself a hard time about. This is not your fault. This is not a defect in your character. This is not a defect in your personality trait. This is none of those things. If you think, okay, I do have a bit of a toxic internal boss, for one, give yourself a break. How long have you been working for that boss for? My goodness, it sounds like you're probably doing really well considering. You're still in your career, you're still doing things, you're still getting promotions, right? Even though you've had a toxic internal boss this whole time, like, good on you. Imagine what you could do without one. And the good news is, your internal boss can change. For most of us, we probably can't change our actual boss. Even if we want to, they are who they are the boss. But with your internal boss, the good news is this: you're actually in charge and you can make the changes you need to make. And then you can feel the benefit from it for your entire career. So you might be thinking, great, I would like to do that. I no longer want to work for a toxic internal boss because it's causing me stress, pressure, anxiety, worry, overwork, overthinking, over ruminating, panic. It's making everything harder for me. You can change. Just like they already make leadership development a priority in a lot of organizations, you can make your own leadership development for your internal boss. And the great thing about doing your own leadership development on your own inner boss is that it's going to have numerous benefits. It's something that you are in charge of. You have the control over. You are the one with the power. Once you actually wake up and realize that you even have an internal boss, because let's face it, most people before I talk to them have never even thought about it. There's just some maniac boss rampaging around their brain the entire time, but they've never sort of noticed. It's a strange thing, but because it's so much a part of just our daily working life, and this was the case for me, because it was so much a part of my daily working life, I didn't even stop to give it a moment's thought. I just thought that's how it was and that it would always be like that. And actually, I don't even know if I thought that because I didn't even think about it. And you might not have either. So there's the good news for you. Now you are thinking about it and you are able to change that internal boss. And here are the benefits that I see when people actually do that work. And believe me, it doesn't take that long. Most people I work with for like 12 hours and it's done. I see people with increased confidence. I see less panic. I see people more likely to take a risk. I see people being able to actually have a growth mindset when they're learning new things. I see people who are more open to change rather than resistant to change. I see people who recover from failures and setbacks much quicker. I see people who speak up more and have more impact. I see people who feel trust in their work and their expertise and their experience, who are actually able to be themselves and bring that to the work that they do. I see people who are more assertive and more able to say yes if it's something they want to do, and more able to say no if it's something that they don't want to do. And these are just some of the benefits that I see. And imagine for a second what the benefits would be if you were working for the actual boss of your dreams. Someone who was, whatever yours is, whether yours is someone who's supportive, encouraging, whether they pick you up when you're feeling down, whether they always set reasonable and realistic standards, whether they always give you positive feedback and praise and just notice every good thing that you're doing, even on the days when you forget. Imagine how you would feel working for a boss like that. I hope for some of you that you already do. But here's the boss that you're actually in control of. You could be working for that kind of boss. Your inner boss could go from being toxic to being the best boss that you honestly ever had or could ever ask for. But from what I see or from what I saw in my professional life, and from what I see in my clients' professional lives, this is a problem which is largely unaddressed because I think it's largely unrecognized. For most people that I talk to, I'm the first person that's ever spoken to them about an inner boss and the inner environment that they work in, the inner culture that they work in, which they're creating for themselves. And then systematically go through with them all the aspects of that, see where they're at with them, and then help them to shift it. I don't see anybody else. I hope in the future there's lots more people doing that, but at the moment, I don't think that there is. And in a way, that's great for me. Gives me a unique selling point. But it's not great for everybody out there because whilst this is a largely unaddressed and unrecognized problem, we have thousands, millions of professionals going through their working life with toxic internal bosses with no idea that they can actually do something to change it. And no idea the kind of impact that that toxic internal boss is actually having on them. And it ain't good. We start talking now about the kind of culture that people work in, the kind of environment that people work in, and the importance of good management, good leadership, good bosses. That is widely understood. It's not always got right, but I think there's an emphasis on it. There's no emphasis on this internal boss aspect because nobody's even noticed that you have one for the most part. So I guess it's my job to tell as many people as possible. But here's where you can help me. So over 1,000 people a month are listening to this podcast. And what if we all told one other person about this idea of an internal boss? And what if we all asked one other person, what's your internal boss like? Because I've been thinking about this and I've noticed that mine's like this. They'd probably say, oh gosh, I've never thought about it. And then you can actually have a conversation. This is the way that we hopefully are going to affect some change in relation to this issue. Because, folks, we need change in relation to this issue. I can't have everyone walking around being a toxic boss inside their own head for their entire career. Please God, so many people have retired and this has been their problem their entire career, but they've never talked to anyone about it and they've never had any support to deal with it. We need to change that. I want to change that. We can't keep ignoring this, especially because most of the people that come to me needing help with this are women and or people who have some other minority identity. They're Black, they're British Asian, they're gay, they're neurodivergent. They're people who have become the first professional in their family. So there's a social mobility element. Or maybe a number of those things are present together. I have a vision in relation to this. And I might sound a bit Martin Luther King Jr. here, but I dream of a day where the way that you manage yourself will be included within your 360, if you do one, will be included within your appraisal or your performance review. And that will just be a normal part of what people talk about in the workplace. So let's say you manage and lead other people. You're going to be asked about that. How's that going? Where do you need development? But you're also going to be asked about what development your own internal boss needs. So let's say I get asked about it in my appraisal and my boss says, so are you, how do you speak to yourself? Is it respectful? Is it tolerant? Is it supportive? Is it encouraging? Or is it something else? And I say, well, actually, I'm super self-critical. I'm criticizing myself most days at work. I dream of a day where my boss will say, Anna, this needs to improve. We don't do that around here. It's against our values. It can hinder your performance and it reduces your well-being. Thank you for telling us that this is what's happening right now. We're going to help you to fix it. Am I dreaming, or can you see a world where this is happening too? Maybe you're part of a trailblazing organization that could be the first one. I would love to talk to you if you are. So that's what I have for you this week. Think about your own internal boss. And if you want to come and do further work with me, here's what I've got for you at the moment. So I mentioned the quiz within the podcast. This is going to help you determine what your internal boss is like right now. And it's going to give you some feedback and some resources so that you can start shifting it straight away. I will leave a link in the show notes. Go and click into that and take that quiz and find out what's happening in relation to your internal boss. Are they toxic or are they top? The other thing you can do is come and work with me privately. So I take most people over 3 months, 12 sessions, typically, and I help people completely rework their inner boss and therefore their confidence. The next thing is that we have a members club launching soon. So this is going to be just for my women listeners, and this is going to be the Confident at Work Members Club. And it's the first time I've ever talked about it. I'm sharing it for the new financial year in the UK because today, when I'm recording this, is the beginning of April 2024. So look out for that and you'll see more details coming soon. All right. I will see you in next week's episode. I hope you have a good week. Bye.